Hello and welcome to High Impact Family Engagement. In this webinar, we're going to be talking specifically about promoting equity for student success as an essential part of our work in family engagement. I'm Judy Carson, and I manage programs on school family community partnerships for the Connecticut State Department of Education. This is the first of 4 webinars in a series where we're exploring evidence-based practices in family engagement. Here, we're going to go beyond the old language of, quote, hard-to-reach parents, and we're going to deepen our understanding of effective practices that build real connections with all families. In the field of family engagement, we're past the question, does family engagement help students to succeed? We have 50 years of research that shows it does. What we're talking about now is which practices are effective and for whom. Thank you to everybody who signed up for today's webinar. We have a very wide range of people joining us, and I invite you to use the chat box to introduce yourself, to let us know your name, let us know where you're from, and what role you're in. We'll be answering all your questions at the end in a Q&A session. But if you have something that you would like to clarify as we're going through, please let us know, and we'll pay attention to those questions for you. How do I? There we go.
Now the arrows should work.
Okay. All right, so sorry about that. We had a little technical problem. So we're going to be talking today about what family engagement is, how it promotes student success, and Ann Henderson is our guest. I'll introduce in just a second. She's going to talk to us about the Research Foundation and best practice. And then we're going to share with you some ideas to get started. The good news is there's lots of energy around family engagement now. And we're very interested in the field of education in connecting families to their students' learning. But what do we mean by family engagement? Many of us could have a definition quickly, and we might all mean very different things. A few months ago, the Connecticut Early Childhood Funders Collaborative challenged the State Department of Education and the Office of Early Education to co-create a definition of family engagement and to co-create this with parents and professionals in Connecticut. We reached out to a number of stakeholders. First, we looked closely at the research, and then we conducted focus groups. These were focus groups not only with professionals, but focus groups composed entirely of parents. And one focus group, in fact, that was all dads. We used this information and we crafted a draft definition and framework that we took to a symposium that had over 100 people participating. We took all of their feedback from that symposium, and we are creating a definition and framework for the State Department of Ed and Office of Early Childhood that is in the final review process right now, and we'll be sharing with that field later this spring. When asking people about what they thought family engagement was, the language you're seeing on the screen was what came up often and over again. Family engagement means a full, equal, and equitable partnership among families, educators, and community partners to promote children's learning and development from birth through college and career. We're going to be unwrapping some of this language today. Specifically, we're going to talk about full, equal, and equitable partnership. We're going to talk also about the different developmental levels. As you see in the definition, we talk not only about learning, but also development. Folks in early childhood are very conscious about children's developmental trajectory, and much of that work happens before they get into formal schooling. So we want to be inclusive as we're working through what family engagement is for the full field of education and early childhood. I'm pleased to introduce our guest speaker today, Ann Henderson. Ann is an advocate for families and for excellent schools. She's tracked the research and written some of the seminal works in the field of family engagement. In fact, it's because of Ann and some of her colleagues that family engagement has emerged as a legitimate field and has the attention that it does today. We were fortunate to enlist Ann's assistance in the Connecticut project to define family engagement. The work you're going to hear about today is the evidence base that is shifting our understanding of what family engagement is, not just in Connecticut, but nationally. And thank you so much for being with us today.
Judy, I'm delighted you invited me and honored to be here. I loved what the Connecticut parents told us as we went around the state. And these are some of the quotes we got from them. Welcome partners, valued voice. As a result, families are active participants. Communication is flowing. And that all of this means mutual respect, honesty, and trust. I think that's a beautiful definition in itself, because it's telling us what parents mean by full, equal, and equitable. They were very adamant about adding equitable. And we'll be talking about what that means as we go on. So let's go to the next slide. So what does a school that we would call a partnership school look like? What are some of its features? Next. We're going to start with a fortress school, which is what a partnership school absolutely does not look like. I'm sure we've all been in or seen or know of fortress schools. And the point here is we've got a standards-based environment for education. And children are held to all sorts of standards, and they are either found to be below basic all the way up to advanced. So in crafting a rubric that we can use to apply to schools, we decided to use those same categories. And a fortress school is definitely below basic. These are the schools that blame the families and the kids because the performance is low. And I've never been in a fortress school that wasn't low performing. And it's because of this attitude. Now, the next level is what we would call a come if we call school, where the drawbridge comes down to let parents in, but it's only at the invitation of the school itself. They come when we say they can come. And parents can come in for certain ritual things. They can get recorded messages. There's a basic level of cooperation. But in a come if we call school, parents are supposed to do what they do at home, and the school does what it does at school. And there's very little flowing communication like what parents were telling us they want. Next. So the next level we would say is proficient. It's what we would call an open door school. The drawbridge is down all the time, and open door schools do a lot of things to engage families. They might even have an action team for family engagement. They're doing curriculum nights and fun fairs. They might have a council. Parents can raise issues in a number of ways. And they do a lot to bridge the cultural differences. And so this is good stuff. And many open door schools are doing well. But what's the point of having standards if we don't set a high bar? There's no point in the world for setting a low standard. And this one we feel is just not high enough. So let's look at what a partnership school looks like. This is the advanced level. In a partnership school, they do whatever it takes to make sure that every family is welcome, engaged, knows what their children are learning and doing in class, and whatever it takes to make sure every kid succeeds, learns what they need to learn, gets the help they need. So everything they do is connected back to what kids are learning and doing in class. Everyone understands how to resolve problems and be an advocate for their kid and get the support they need. There's a lot of partnership around looking at their issues and identifying, the achievement gaps and how can we reach them and what do families say are their barriers for being more engaged with their children's learning, and in making the school community a really vibrant place where families are learning too. One of the things we feel is essential to this is the home visit. We'll talk more about that going forward. So this is a partnership school.
I'll let people know that we have a little tool you can use as a self-assessment. And so if you go to downloads, there's a quick survey that you can take to take a look at your own school or a school you know and see how you rate on these categories. It's in the handout section.
Good, thank you, Judy. So this rubric is deeply rooted in the research that I've been tracking since 1981. A new wave of evidence, which you can download with no charge from the Southwest Ed Development Lab, is the latest in a series of 4 of these reviews of the research. And we found over the years that there is ample evidence that shows that engaging families really does have a powerful, sustained, long-term impact on student learning. So what kinds of changes do we see next? The overall finding, what everyone should just take away, is that when families are able to be engaged, their kids do better and the schools get better. The slides are jumping, so just track back. There we go. Let's start. Let's do this one. So we definitely have a collective impact that schools get better when they engage families. And in what kind of ways do they get better? Next. They get better in all the ways we measure, like grades and test scores. They also tend to enroll in higher level programs because they have more confidence. And they succeed in them. They get promoted and earn credits. Partly this is because they have adapted well to school and come to school because they feel that it's a place that understands them and respects their families. As a result, they behave better when they're there. They're just, more motivated to be good students, and they tend to graduate and go on to higher education. So this is what this large body of research overall is telling us. Now somebody might ask, well, okay, if it's so important, why aren't parents more involved? And the answer to that is that the ball is in our court as educators. The most consistent predictor of whether parents actually become involved in their children's learning and development at home and at school are what we do, the programs and practices that we encourage and guide parents to become involved. And this is a good summation of the research of Dr. Joyce Epstein at Johns Hopkins. And Judy, you've done a lot of work in Connecticut with Joyce, right?
Yes, we've been part of her network for quite some time, and many schools in Connecticut have used the action team model, which they've found gives them a good infrastructure for carrying the work through from year to year and achieving goals that are linked to their school improvement plans.
Yeah, that action team idea is a wonderful innovation in the field, and every school should have one. It's a great way to bring people together around the table and just lay out what you need to do and get it done. Next. So let's take a look at some of the recent really strong studies that give us ideas for very specific practice. This study, called Organizing Schools for Improvement, looked at a deep, deep database that Chicago collects on its schools. They collect more research on their schools than any other school district, and that database is a goldmine for researchers. So these researchers looked at the characteristics of schools that had made significant gains and what was present in those schools. And then they looked at schools that didn't make gains, and they looked at what was absent in those schools. And they found the same thing. In other words, what was present in the schools that were doing well and had made major gains were exactly what was missing in the schools that were falling behind. And schools that had strong ties with their family and community were 4 times more likely to make significant gains in math and reading. But how did they define family and community ties? What were these schools actually doing? And this is what they found. They found not that teachers were having parent-teacher conferences or that the school was doing, fun activities for families. They found that the schools were making deep connections between parents and teachers and into the community that the school serves. So teachers in these schools really understood the local community. Even if they didn't live there, they spent time there, they used local resources, and they knew what was going on. And they did that because they spent time there and they talked to parents and students. Another thing they found was that teachers did outreach to families in ways beyond just sending a folder home or making robocalls. They were inviting parents to come in and observe in class. If parents couldn't come during the weekday, they would have a weekend and they'd set up the class and parents could see how it was working and what the teachers were doing. And they tried to understand parents' concerns about their children, about what was happening in their community, and they really embraced parents as partners. They didn't see them as people who needed to be fixed or people with a lot of deficits. They saw them as people who could collaborate with them to make sure every kid did well. And as a result, parents responded. In schools that did these first 2 things, parents were much more involved than in other schools, and they really responded to teachers' concerns. So this is a recipe for success. And this applies across, from early childhood all the way through high school. Although this study was done in elementary schools, other studies on high-performing high schools and middle schools and excellent practices in early childhood still have these same features. Next. So let's go across the pond, as they say in Great Britain or the UK, and look at a study they did there. This was a study on 500 schools that did a pilot called Achievement for All. The program was focused on raising achievement for students with special needs, but in the UK, special needs is not just children with disabilities, it's children whose first language isn't English, children from low-income families, children with any kind of disadvantage. And the linchpin of the program was what they called structured conversations between teachers and parents. And the students in the program did 25% better than all students in the UK, that is better than the national average, and 50% better than students with special needs who were not in the Achievement for All program. So that was a stunning success, and the program is now being rolled out across the entire country. So let's take a look at these structured conversations in the bubbles at the bottom. Generally, these were one-on-one for about an hour, and they replaced the traditional parent-teacher conference. They happened in the beginning of the year, and there was a period of time for welcoming and getting to know each other, then focusing in on the children's skills, then sharing strategies the teacher's going to be using in class and that families can use at home, developing a plan for working together, and then establishing new learning behaviors. And when they invested this kind of time and effort to build a close partnership with families, they really got major gains for students. And this really repeats the study we were just looking at in Chicago, the same kind of close connections. That seems to be the linchpin. Next. So let's go back to the US and look at a study that was done on Title I schools, where they examined different teacher practices that were associated with higher student learning in about 80 Title I schools across the country. And students' reading and math scores improved 40 to 50% faster when teachers did these three things: meeting with families face-to-face, sending materials home that parents can use to help their child, and staying in regular touch about progress. Now you'll see this says telephoned. Of course, now it would be text messages and other means of communications, tweets, Facebook posts, and so on. But regular touch about progress, that's personal. So 40 to 50% faster rate of gain.
Anne, we can add another resource here. There's some research by Todd Rogers at Harvard, and he's looked specifically at texting with parents, and This was in a group with students who were in high school. And it was weekly text to the parents about how the students were doing. And he had a study that we'd call the gold standard, where he could have a control group and a test group. And he showed incredible differences between the two groups, just with that simple weekly text letting parents know how their students were doing. And with that, Anne, I want to ask you, we did have a question from our audience. A lot of what you've just mentioned with these studies applies to students in middle and high school. But is there anything else specifically that you know from the research that we should look at for middle and high school?
Yes, I can add a resource, Judy. I'll send it to you, a study that my colleagues at the Annenberg Institute for School Reform did on high-performing middle and high schools in New York City. And there's quite a lot that they do to make sure that families are able to connect with what their kids are doing at school. It's much harder in high school for families to build a relationship with teachers. Their kids have so many teachers. They're not sure who to connect to, who knows their kids well. So those high-performing high schools that serve all low-income children in New York City that were the subject of this Beating the Odds study had advisory systems where each student had an advisor who was the parent's primary contact, and they did a number of important outreach things with families so that they would understand what their student work was looking like and whether it met the standards. There were exhibitions of student work. There were Saturday academies. There was a college office that was where in every one of these schools, and the number of students who went on to college way exceeded the district average. And that was where parents would go to find out how to support their children's higher education and make sure that they graduated on time with an acceptance letter in hand. So I can send that to you, Judy. There's a whole bunch of tools we developed to assess your middle and high school in terms of whether it's doing the things the Beating the Odds schools are doing.
Great, thank you. So for everybody listening, we will send out a list of resources after the webinar. Give us about 48 hours, and then we'll send that out to your email.
Great. Thank you for asking that, Judy. That's very important. So if we step back from the research and all those specific practices we've just been talking about, what are the basic keys to building these powerful partnerships? And it's so interesting to me because they go back exactly to what the parents across Connecticut asked us to do. What they felt was their definition of a school-family partnership. And the groundwork is building relationships. This is the soil in which everything else takes root. You can do that with home visits, you can do it with community walks, lots and lots of personal one-on-one contact. You mentioned Todd Rogers a little while ago, Judy. I went to a presentation he gave on that study here in Washington a couple of years ago, and I asked him if you could just start out by sending text messages to parents. Don't parents need to have some personal connection to the teacher first? And he said, absolutely. That the text messaging and other means of, technology assisted communication really needs to start with the personal relationship, that meeting with families face to face, the outreach to parents, those structured conversations about learning that the earlier studies we've just been talking about have recommended. But that's the way you have to start. And then you begin linking all of your communications and all the things that you're doing with families explicitly to what students are learning, what the standards say is good work for their children's age and grade level, understanding how the assessments work, getting into the classroom, having deeper conversations with their kids at home about what they do, what they did in school today. So instead of saying, what did you do in school today? To which the answer is always what?
Nothing.
Exactly. To, what happened with your science project today? Did the frog grow a leg, or, did your experiment work? Did your hypothesis test out? And just building a much better understanding of how children learn and develop at every age and grade level. And then going deeper beyond that to address your cultural and language and ethnic and other differences that are present in your school community. Bring people together, get them sharing stories and talking about how they, what kind of learning they do at home and what their parents did. Those things do a tremendous amount to build bridges between the different communities that are present in every school. And also, and here we're getting to the equity issue, we must always equalize power. So that's why those structured conversations about learning are so effective, I think, because they're putting parents and teachers at the table together, recognizing that each is expert in their area. Teachers are expert on curriculum, and parents are experts about their kids and their community. And when they come together to share that knowledge, it equalizes the power differential and really builds what we would consider to be a powerful partnership. Next. So how do we get started? Judy and Betsy, I just want to congratulate you for all the work you have done in Connecticut to make excellent ideas and processes and practices get out there to help people do this kind of work. I know you've adopted the welcoming walkthrough, probably 10 years ago, right?
Mm-hmm. Probably.
Yeah.
Yep.
So.
And that's my colleague Betsy Laborious at CREC. And in fact, we're going to be talking about how to make your school more welcoming in next month's webinar. And as Ann, you were talking about the research, we can also share a list of links to all of the studies we're talking about. And we can even send some links also to studies that mention welcoming as a preamble to next month's conversation.
Oh, that's a great idea. So a welcoming walkthrough is really an action research tool where parents and community members and school staff and students basically get together to walk through the school and assess where they are in terms of creating a family-friendly, inclusive environment where everyone feels welcome and as though they belong, as though this is what creates a school community, making sure that your signage is welcoming, there are places for parents to walk, it's clear where the entrance is. I don't know how many of you have been through an experience like I've had many times where I walk up to the front door of the school and everything's locked and there's no way to get in, and you have to walk around the side and you have to try all the different doors, and then maybe in the back parking lot by the dumpster is where the door really is. that's not a welcoming school, and they've not done a welcoming walkthrough. But also thinking about redesigning the back to school night. I know a number of schools across Connecticut are doing this to make them much more personal, to start out with a very close parent-teacher connection and creating a collaboration plan that very first back to school night on how parents and teachers are going to communicate throughout the year to support learning. And that event, instead of being all, like a cattle herd where everybody goes into the all-purpose room, instead going into the classrooms, can be a wonderful opportunity to then revamp your Title I school parent compacts, which every Title I school in your state and across the country must have, to describe how parents and teachers are going to share the responsibility for improving student learning. What you learn at back to school night can just flow right into those compacts. And again, Connecticut has been a leader across the United States in looking at these compacts, which have been in the law since 1992 or 3, and making them much more meaningful and linked to learning. There's some resources that will be posted, but Connecticut has a website on how to do this, and it all goes back to starting with your back to school night. And finally, relationship building home visits. This is a program that started in Sacramento and has spread like wildfire across the country because it's had such wonderful impact. And Betsy, I think CREC is now the as a hub for home visits.
Yes. Yep. We are working on the design of PTHV, Parent Teacher Home Visitation, here in Connecticut, and we are also meeting with great success. In fact, we're having a training next week, and we are an innovator in terms of pre-KK home visitation in Connecticut too. So we're excited, very excited.
So if you want to know where to start, the home visit is making the home visits before school starts, sets the year off, well begun is half done. Just building those connections. Parents, it has an enormous influence on the child. I've been along on these home visits, and the children and the family are just wide-eyed and awed that the teacher would come and see them in their home, and they can show the teacher their room and their pet and their favorite toys, and the parents and teachers are talking about their hopes and dreams for the children and what they want them to become as they grow up and what they want them to be learning and how they're going to work closely together to make sure that the child feels totally supported at home and at school in their learning. It just has a wonderful impact, and the research on it is very promising. Next. So all that we've been talking about are what we would say are high impact strategies. In other words, they have really significant long-term effects on children's learning and development. And when we combine high impact strategies, we really start to see major gains. Schools, in other words, what we're saying is that partnership style family engagement is a core strategy for turning our schools around. If we combine home visits with linking our Title I compacts to learning, for example, rather than to behavior or to what parents will do at home, what teachers do at school, but not how they will communicate, but really pulling that all together, you're building relationships. You're sharing knowledge and goals for the children. You're explaining what's going on in class and how children are doing on the different standards they have to master. You're focusing on the skills, you're developing a plan, and all of this is what leads to improved student performance. You can use the text messaging, you can use Twitter, but it all pulls together in terms of, building that relationship first, building the knowledge and understanding and agreements on how you're going to work together, and then rolling it all out.
And we have a couple of wonderful questions. First, we've talked about differentiating for parents, not one size fits all. And we have a question about reaching out to dads.
Oh, so important. When we say parents, we don't mean just moms. And that was one of the things the Dad's Focus Group told us. They said they feel like, the phone calls always go into the, to the moms, and the letters go home to the moms, and the dads feel like maybe they don't belong. So we have to be sure explicitly to include dads and to ask dads what kinds of things they would like to do with the school, rather than just doing the usual things and expecting, both moms and dads to come. So dads like to, a lot of dads like to do things with security around the school. They like to, supervise for the playground, but ask them, because it'll be different. Each community is going to have their own ideas of what they want to do, but sending that message that we mean dads, we want dads to be here. If you come, we're not going to look at you like, well, what are you doing here in this school, buddy? But welcome.
One of the other things that the focus group of dads told us was it really helps to have that father-to-father outreach. And so if you're working in a team, if you have an action team, you have a group of people who are working with you, and you enlist a dad who can connect with other dads, that can make a difference. And we have another great question. And this is the issue that we always face. We have limitations on time, and we have a question about how can teachers do this with all the other expectations around curriculum and assessment and evaluation, everything else that we're asking teachers to do now.
That's a wonderful question, and I think we have to look at how we're spending our time and whether it's effective. For example, most schools do a back-to-school night anyway. That's pretty much standard practice. So what we're saying is do it differently. Reorganize it. Look at all the things you're now doing with families and ask yourself, is this building relationships? Is this linked to learning? And often the answer is, well, not really. Look at your school newsletter. Does it really explain what kids are learning and doing and how parents can support that at home? Or is it more just we're having a field trip, pack a lunch, remember to sign the permission slip, but not that much about where they're going, what they're going to be learning, what you can ask them when they get home. So first start with what you're already doing and assess it and link it much better to learning and building relationships. That's step number one. The home visits are an additional time. Teachers are compensated for this and they're voluntary. But what happens is after a few teachers make home visits and come back and talk about the experience, they just sell it to the other teachers. We have to think about how, if we look back to that Westat study, that was the last of the 3 studies I discussed, and teachers met families face to face. That can be standing out in front of the building at the beginning and the end of the day, or inviting parents to come in and drop their kids off at the classroom. It can be those class meetings at back to school night rather than whole school meetings. So just doing things a bit differently to build the relationships, and then making those calls home every month. Or once you do that, then you can just do the text messaging. There are a lot of systems out there like Remind and others that just set up an easy to use text messaging system, right, that you just send right from your phone. So there are ways to do this that respect teachers' time, but also, do push a bit to look at what are you doing and how are you using your time and how could you reallocate that to do what's most important.
I'm going to put in a shameless plug for Anne's book called Beyond the Bake Sale. Oops. There's a tool in here that allows you to do a little bit of a self-study on everything you're doing in family engagement, and then to assess all those activities and say, number one, does it build relationships? Number two, does it link to learning? And after you go through your laundry list of everything you're doing in your school, if it doesn't meet those two criteria, you get to ask yourself, why are we doing it? Or could we retool it so it does build relationships and link to learning? And people have found that a very effective way to do what they're already doing, but in a different way, so as not to add more time and energy, but to get more bang for the buck.
All the major chapters have checklists at the end that you can use to assess how your school is doing. So we go beyond, building relationships and linking to learning are the first two chapters, but there's also a chapter on addressing differences, supporting advocacy, and sharing power. So you can look at yourself and through a variety of lenses with the checklists in the book. And then each chapter, of course, is loaded with tips and tools that people who are doing this well have told us how they've pulled it off.
So,
any other questions?
Any other questions? No, I don't think we have any other questions right now. So we have a number of resources listed here on today's PowerPoint, and you can download today's PowerPoint from the webinar. Is that right? Okay, we're going to add today's PowerPoint to the handout, so you'll be able to get it. But then in addition, we're going to add the other studies and the other resources that we've been talking about as we've been going through. So your questions today have been terrific, and they've been very helpful in helping us to add to our resource bank. So after today's webinar, if you do have further questions, feel free to email them to me, Judy Carson, and we will share resources with you.
I want to just put in a little plug for NAFSCI. I think that's the next slide, Judy. We now have a professional association for people who do the work of engaging families, the National Association for Family, School, and Community Engagement. I am a founding member of NAFSCI and one of the founding board members as well. I'm very excited about this because it's the first time we've ever had a professional association that recognizes the importance of this work and builds the capacity of people who do it to do it even better. And there are lots of opportunities to network. We have communities of practice. We have webinars and advocacy. The website is filled with information about the field and the latest research. So check it out. And if you like it, please join.
Then I wanted to also add, NAFSCI is a partner in a national conference that's happening in July. So if you don't know, there's a family engagement conference that happens once a year, and it is attended by like 1,500 people from around the country and around the world. It's amazing to have a huge conference just focused on family engagement. And so we will also add that to the resources, but it's happening in July in Cincinnati, Ohio. And I wanted to also add that in the resources, we are releasing an evidence-based guide for the state of Connecticut. This is part of the ESSA work, the new education law, the federal law that guides Title I and all the other federal programs. And in a number of areas, the Department of Education has looked at the research so that we can help districts to only plan and fund projects that are based in evidence. One of those guides is directed towards family engagement. And so that, I believe, will be coming out of the Department of Education in the next couple of weeks. But all of the studies that we've been talking about today are embedded in that guide. So that's another tool that will be coming out. And if there are folks in your district that are working on the applications for federal funding, they'll be receiving those guides as well. So we're really moving the field of family engagement very firmly towards practices that we know have sound research behind them. So I wanted to also just remind you that we have sessions 2, 3, and 4 of this webinar series. Those dates are on the screen, and when you signed up for this one, you also had a chance to sign up for the others. They'll all be from 10 o'clock to 11 a.m. And also, we have sessions of Friday Cafe. So if you don't know, that's a monthly networking session, and that's where we get together in person, and we have a short presentation and a chance to meet and talk with other people who are doing family engagement work across the state of Connecticut. Our next session is on April 6th. That's in the eastern part of the state. That will happen at ECSU. That runs from 8:30 to 10:30. And our topic there, we're going to be looking at the resources and support that people need to do this work called family engagement. We're looking very closely at a capacity building model. So what is it that our staff, broadly defined, need in order to do a good job with family engagement? So that's Friday Cafe. You should have also seen that in the notice that invited you to the webinar, and we hope you sign up for that list. That's www.fridaycafe.org, and join us in person. So Anne, is there anything else you'd like to say before we close?
I just want to wish everybody a happy spring, and I'm looking forward to continuing to work with Judy on the definition of family engagement and other things in Connecticut. It's been a great pleasure. It's been almost 10 years now, Judy, that we've been working together.
I think it has. We've been really fortunate. And as you can tell, there's a lot of excitement in family engagement. And I have to thank Anne for being such a support and a resource to the state of Connecticut.
Well, thank you, Judy. I congratulate you on being such a leader among states in what you're doing and have been doing.
We have some good things happening. So thank you to everybody who tuned in this morning. We'll send you all the resources we promised. This session will also be archived, so if you'd like to use it again later or share it with somebody else, you'll be able to do that. All right, thank you, everybody.